Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Larimer, and I'm joined today by Manfredi and Brandon Lovejoy. And today we're going to talk about independence, what it means and how it applies in your life, and also with Eden. So independence is, we just celebrated the 4th of July, the independence of the United States as we created the Constitution. But independence is something that we have to recreate every single day, because if we're not careful, we slip right back into dependence and slavery. And if we don't have a keen eye on what independence means, then we won't realize that when it's slipping away and we've lost it. And then we have to go through all the struggles we had to go through as a society to gain our independence in the first place. So one of the things that we like to talk about is freedom, this, freedom, that. I want my freedoms. But as Jordan Peterson says, the other half of the equation from freedom is responsibility. And so I like to define independence as the combination of freedom and responsibility. If you have freedom but no responsibility, that means somebody else is taking on the responsibility of giving you your freedom. You're dependent on that person, and you're not really free. You might be able to go where you want to go, and you might have food all around you, but because you're not taking responsibility of producing that freedom in your life, you've slipped into dependence and you've lost your independence. And that has all kinds of ramifications for those of us who actually care about freedom, right? Because there's another aspect of independence. It's not just how independent you can be as a person, because independence is I guess a team sport. You might be able to grow some of your own food and stuff, and do some of the things yourself, but that can only take you so far because you only have so many hours in the day, right? So you want to maximize both your personal independence, but then the independence of your family, right? Both your local, direct family, your immediate family, but also your extended family. And then if you're part of a church or some organization like that, you want that organization and that broader community to be as independent as possible. And then you want your town to be as independent as possible, your state, your country, and so forth. And this is why we call it like fractal governance. You want to structure your life with fractal independence, maximizing the independence at each stage, maximizing the amount of responsibility you as an individual, you as a family, your extended family, your church or local community, your town. You want to be as local as possible with as much responsibility as possible in that structure of your life. And by doing that, you maximize your freedom. You maximize your resiliency, the amount of anti-fragility in society. Because when you have all these different groups of people, all these different families, they're all independent, then all of society is more robust, and we don't have catastrophic failures that's like a monocrop that takes out the entire food supply in one go. Right? You've got lots of independent, redundant sources of the things we need in life, and that is what gives us independence. So another way you can think about independence is to identify anything in your life where there's only one provider, right? You only have one provider of internet? Do you only have one provider of power? Do you have one provider of food, right? And you might appear that you've got multiple providers, right? You say, well, how many providers of news do you have? If you're following the mainstream media, you realize they're all owned by the same people. You're not actually independent in your sources of information, and so forth. So look at how many independent sources of that you have, and you got to look more than one layer deep, right? If you just say, well, I've got 20 people that can sell me food, but they're all getting that food from the same distributor and all regulated by the same regulator, you realize you've got a lot more dependence there that's hidden 1 or 2 layers deep, and that dependence creates fragility, which causes disruption in your life. So let's talk about some this is Eden, right? This discussion is about how we can have independence in Eden, and Eden on EOS in particular, right? So we're coming together, forming a community of people dedicated to the independence of the EOS network, so that the community can self-govern, self-fund, self-develop, without dependence on any single source, right? And that's a big part of why independence is important. As a community, we want to support our own local developers. We want to buy and sell as much as possible from each other, using EOS as a currency, so that all of the members of Eden increase their independence in their life, because the Eden community itself is becoming more and more independent as we grow and evolve. So that's my spiel on like the theory of independence. The question becomes, what are some practical strategies that we can take in our life, in our communities, to increase independence? So in our life, it's, just old advice, have savings, have, food and things like that stored up so that you've got independence there. Learn skills, right? So that you're not dependent on others to do things for you. Saving money, having a diversified portfolio, having tools and things that you can use to do things. Getting off grid, if you can get your own solar power and get your own well. All these things increase your independence as an individual or as a family, and then make you a more resilient component of any community that you join. Now, obviously, not everyone can do all of these things, but those are just the ideas of some of the things you can do to increase independence in your own life from all the rest of society. But when it comes to communities, what are some ways that we can increase independence? Well, the first thing is everyone in the community needs to know the value of independence, because it's very, very easy for a community to defect, or sorry, individuals of the community to defect, and as a result, the entire community loses its independence. The example I give in my book, More Equal Animals, is Walmart comes to town. Everyone becomes dependent on Walmart because they got lower prices, and all the previously diverse set of stores and shops that were owned by locals, they go out of business. And so even the individuals that were supporting the local stores lose their independence because the other members of the town defected and chose the lower prices and dependence. Right. So what your neighbors do can impact your independence if you are not diligent in educating them, or if you don't move to an area where people value independence and want to work together to secure independence as a group. And that's why it's really important that we have algorithms for reaching consensus, right? Because you need to reach consensus on, hey, we're all going to be independent, and these are the ways that we're going to coordinate to make sure that we're independent. And this is how we're going to hold people accountable when their individual actions undermine the independence of the group, by basically outsourcing necessities. So an example here, which I discuss in my book, is import and export taxes. It's a tax, ooh, bad, right? That's what the anarchists would immediately say. But from a perspective of independence and fractal governance, it's a border. It's a border that you're establishing with your community and the rest of the world. It says, hey, we want to value doing business internally to our community higher than sending business outside the community. And therefore, all the members of our local community, our town, our country, are going to preferentially do business locally, even if it's more expensive than external sources, because it might be more expensive to buy local steel, to buy local produce, than to import it from some other country. But the difference there in the price is your loss of independence. So when you value independence, then the increased price for those local goods is justified. And it's actually net profit, because that independence gives you pricing power in the future. It gives you the ability to say no to these other countries and people outside your family. So in the future, because you're more independent, right? Without the ability to say no, you can't negotiate price, you can't negotiate margin. You have to take what you're given, and so there's a real cost. It's hard to put a dollar value on it and measure it in terms of dollars, but there's a cost to your loss of independence, and that's why it's important that a group value it, that they remind themselves of the value of independence. And that's what I like about Independence Day. It's an opportunity to revisit that and not just celebrate the birthday of the United States. I think that's a much lesser view of what you can be doing on Independence Day. If every Independence Day we take the time to take stock of our lives and our community and recommit ourselves to independence, and that was just a habit, a tradition that we establish as a community, then society can start moving toward independence. We can recapture that value that we've lost sight of, that we've taken for granted. And as we've taken it for granted, it slipped through our fingers. So back to the topic of excise taxes or import-export taxes. One of the things I point out in my book is any fixed tax is going to allow society to assume it's there, right? As the market changes and things become more competitive, as prices change, all of a sudden, even though you have a tax, it might still be cheaper to import with the tax than to buy locally. And so from a anti-fragile perspective, having randomness in the tax structure, so sometimes taxes on particular goods are really, really high, like 300% or 3,000%, prohibitively high, and other times they're non-existent, gives us the ability to import from others, but we can't become dependent on them, because periodically there's just no access to it. It's like when you lose access to the power from the electric company for a week, all of a sudden a bunch of people are buying generators because they realize they can't count on the power to always be there. And that is a very powerful way of building independence and resiliency into your life, is to periodically fast from everything. And so a community can implement periodic fasting by doing randomized excise taxes or import and export taxes across the different goods and services in society. The other aspect of the randomization is it takes the need to have human decision-making on what the tax rate should be out of the equation, because that's a point of corruption. It's a point where there needs to be consensus. It's a point where dependence can subtly be reintroduced, where favoritism can be played. But if a community can agree to the simple point that, hey, we value independence, and we know that randomness is a good way of building resiliency into any system, and then the community can put that border around there. I'll give you another example of how we're adding independence, or considering adding independence, to the Eden community. When the tokens or the EOS is collected by the community and then distributed to the elected representatives, you can transfer EOS within the community from Eden member to Eden member with no fee. But as soon as you want to withdraw the EOS from the community, we're thinking about adding an export tax. And an export tax goes back into the community fund to be redistributed to everyone else in the community through the elected leaders. And in this way, when you're doing business inside the community, you can reallocate things easily. But as soon as you go outside, then that's when things take effect. And so that's a way of encouraging doing business with other eating community members, building independence of the eating community versus just taking all the EOS immediately out of the community. So I believe that covers my introductory spiel on what independence is, practical ways of achieving it, how it relates to eating on EOS. And so now I'd like to open the floor to Mike and Lovejoy to offer any questions or just kick off the conversation.
All right. Well, I guess let's back up a minute just to the basic concept of independence and how that looks at a group and an individual level. Because from one point of view, you could say that an individual is independent, but they're always going to be dependent on some form of external resources. And you said that independence is a team sport, and I like that. Because we're in a web of relationships all the time, either with our friends and family or the natural world around us. And so from one point of view, it seems like true independence, paradoxically, is really sophisticated interdependence. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, independence is a scale, right? You're never going to be fully independent until you're colonizing Mars, right? And even then you're dependent on the technology that's there, right, and that's decaying and resupply and all those other things. But you want to maximize independence in the individual. And then as you bring individuals together, you want to maximize independence of the group of individuals, which gets into the fractal structure. It's not, what we don't want to say is you have one giant team humanity, and we're all trying to be independent together. That doesn't work. That's globalization. And that introduces fragility and actually minimizes the power, minimizes the independence of the individual, right? Because you're more independent, the less you depend on. So the fewer people you depend on, or the fewer people you're interdependent with, the greater your independence from the rest of humanity. So that's why we have these fractal structures, and you value families, why we value tribes, why we value localism, and then states, and then federal, and then global. Without the fractal structure in place, then we all become subject to these mammoth international corporations, and we are now completely dependent on an elite few who run the World Economic Forum and the central banks, and control the money and control the laws, because we don't have the ability to say no, because we need what they have, right? We can't say no to the technology companies unless we're willing to go back to a world without cell phones. We can't say no to tracking unless we're willing to turn off all kinds of services. So we've lost our ability to say no to the rules that are imposed on our life, whether they're mask mandates or forced injections or whatever comes down the pipe. Without independence, you can't say no. And so to maximize individual independence means minimizing the number of people that you're interdependent with.
But the World Economic Forum says that in the future, we will own nothing and we'll be happy. We'll just rent everything. Well, aren't there efficiencies? I mean, can't we just rely on the big companies to like efficiently run the world and allow them to lead? And what's wrong with that?
It's only efficient if you don't mind slavery, if you don't mind dependence, if you don't value your freedom, then maybe it's efficient. But if you put any value on those subjective things, then all of a sudden it's not cheaper, it's more expensive. Because you don't know what you're losing. You don't know the quality of life. If you don't own any assets, you're not getting any income from those assets, right? And then you've got inflation that's eating away at your savings. and you've got no ability to keep up. So the world where you own nothing and you rent everything is a world where you're a slave living paycheck to paycheck, because even the money that they pay you starts evaporating if you don't spend it. And if the only thing you can spend it on is renting something for a day, then as soon as you get out of line, they cut you off and you've got nothing. And so you want to maintain your independence. It's something to value, and it's that independence that brings fulfillment. It's how you fulfill your responsibility to life on this planet, is to maintain your independence so that life can go on. Because when everyone's dependent on one system and that centralized system fails, everything fails. And now, not only are you dead, you've contributed to the death of humanity. So anti-fragility is a responsibility each of us has to respect nature and how nature designed us all to be different and to be independent organisms and yet cooperate.
Dan, let's put that on the court in a. I'd love to present that in a very accessible, everyday way. That's also, I think, going to be less heavy. If we take something like Facebook or something like Google Docs, Gmail, and talk about how these things apply there, right? What would we trade? How have we become dependent, and what would it cost if? I mean, Google as a company going away is kind of a weird thing to consider, but what if Facebook all of a sudden became unavailable? I think it's actually kind of hard to picture that because we're so used to it. We're so used to what Facebook offers. But maybe you could talk about, like, if one of those services was suddenly unavailable, where would that leave us?
Sure. The easiest way to realize how dependent you are is to throw your cell phone in the ocean and then realize, hey, I need help. Who am I going to call? And you don't know anyone's phone number, right? You might know the phone number of your significant other and your own number, and that might be it. And so, whereas 20 years ago, you knew several different phone numbers because you might have to call them from a payphone, right? And you had redundant ways of backing it up. That's a source of dependence that we kind of take for granted, that we've got this technology. Even if you don't lose your cell phone, if the cell network goes down, or you can't pay your bill, or they decide to cancel you, and all of a sudden you don't have cell service. An example of something that happened to me recently is Amazon froze my account because of various reasons, and I couldn't order anything from Amazon. And there's a real challenge of getting access to my account again on Amazon. When you don't have Amazon, you realize, wow, it's a lot harder and it takes a lot longer to get the things that you want. So we've kind of become dependent because of convenience. In the case of Google, hey, you want to find information on the internet? Fine, but you've got to sell your soul and all the information about you. And now they have a complete profile on you and everything you're searching for. And they know all your friends. Facebook's the same thing. You're giving up so much information in the process and control. Right? Google decides what search results to present to you. They are controlling your worldview because you don't have independence of information, independence of search. And by controlling the information you get, they control your actions, because you can be misinformed, you can be uninformed, because of what they choose to show, what they suggest to you to search for. All these things impact your life and cause you to lose sovereignty over your own decision-making ability when you become dependent upon these organizations. Email is particularly dangerous because email is the key to every other online service. Imagine if Google shut down your email account, and now all of a sudden you can't reset your password on your bank, on every service you use online. You can't get GitHub, all these different things, just things fall apart. And anyone who's had a domain name with an email on it and then lost a domain name realizes how difficult it is to recover accounts when you lose the email address that you once had. So having independence on communication to your friends, family, and so forth is a critical thing to keep in mind, because if you lose it, how do you coordinate? And the inability to coordinate and to communicate is how in war, you want to disrupt your enemy's communications. Well, guess what? The governments give us all these wonderful tools for communication that they can control. And when the time comes to control the population, internet goes down. No one can communicate. And now they've got the upper hand because the government still has the ability to communicate. And that is where the appearance of freedom, right? Oh yeah, I have freedom. I can talk to anyone. I can travel anywhere I want. Disappears in an instant when you realize that you have not taken responsibility for providing that freedom to yourself and your local community.
Dan, we're actually just a little over 25 minutes. I don't know if you want to provide like a wrap up Independence Day message for today, or if you want to go a few more Q&A. But I just want to let you know it's 25 minutes in.
Yeah, I think that we've had a fantastic call so far. So thank you everyone for tuning in to this Eden on EOS communication for Independence Day. And I hope that you join Eden and work with us to increase the independence in our lives. So thank you, everyone.
Happy Independence Day, everybody.